Hello, dear listeners. Welcome back to Conflicted. Aimen, there you are. How you doing, man? This war, the escalation is underway. It is not ending anytime soon.
Well, first of all, it's amazing that the IRGC seems to be determined to always target my sleeping time or my nap time. Can you believe it? Okay, so yesterday, it was around 3:45. I was having a siesta, just like a good Arab would do, like in 15 minutes, just 15 bloody minutes into my siesta, and I wake up on between 7 and 8 ballistic missiles just exploding in the sky above us, and shaking the whole building and the apartment, basically was like it felt so.
I mean, you said that these missiles were louder than ever. They're bigger, they're badder than ever.
Yes. But then what happened is, it's like really just minutes before 4 a.m. Again, I'm sleeping. I went to bed at 2 a.m. because I was so busy working, as usual. And then, I want some sleep, man. I was just napping as usual. And then at roughly, just 2-3 minutes before 4 a.m., the alarm on the phone, the state, sponsored alarm, basically when they send you the alarm that missiles on their way. And so it's like beep, 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 so I woke up and, because it sounds like a loud text message, you know what I mean? And then, it's like 10 seconds for me just to read, that message, there is a missiles on the way, stay away from windows. My house is nothing but windows. That's why it was flooded just a few days ago with the rain. And so I hear the loudest, never heard it. It's as if, the missile landed just, 200 meters away.
My goodness.
To the point where I went to the balcony. I opened the balcony. I went in, basically in my pajamas, just to basically see what happened. Am I seeing smoke anywhere? It was so loud. And then I look up and I find basically that kind of little remnants of fireworks. It feels basically as if they have intercepted and the debris is falling. So I was able to see the debris, but it was, loud, absolutely loud.
Well, Aimen, it's not just outside your bedroom that this war is escalating. It's escalating everywhere. In the last few days, the Houthis finally joined the war. We've been waiting for that.
Woohoo!
The Iranian ballistic missile barrages have been bigger and bigger. Iran launched 48 missiles yesterday, according to what I've seen online. That's nearly twice as many as the week before. So it raises the question what the IRGC's true capability is. Only a few weeks ago, talking points from the White House and from Israel were that, we've destroyed 90% of their ballistic missile capability.
Yeah, as if.
Yeah, I think that was exaggerated.
Here in Conflicted, we told everyone before even the war started that the numbers that are out there are outrageously underestimating the capability and the stockpile that the IRGC did. They were planning for this war for generation.
Well, we've seen evidence of that become unmistakably clear in the last few days. There was a big attack against the Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. A Boeing E-3 Sentry, more commonly known as an AWACS plane, was destroyed or at least damaged.
No, it was totally destroyed.
This came as quite a shock. It was actually on the runway of the base when it was attacked. This raises all sorts of questions like, where is Iran getting this intel? But Aimen, this must have pissed off the Saudis. I'm wondering, when are the Arabs, the GCC Arabs, going to join this war properly?
Well, it seems that this moment is approaching quite soon. And I tell you why. My Saudi intelligence source, he told me that the Iranian IRGC used 14 ballistic missiles with multiple warheads.
Oh, my.
Yes, which they are using on regular basis against Israel.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen the videos. It sort of blows up in the air, and then all these little spiders come out. And then how can you defend against such a weapon?
Exactly. So now they have used this against Prince Sultan Air Base, just 80 kilometers south of Riyadh. And that led to a widespread destruction across the entire base. Several refueling aircrafts were either entirely or partially damaged, as well as the AWACS, the $700 million AWACS airplane that was totally destroyed. And of course, there were 15 severe injuries, including 5 in critical conditions among the American forces there. And I know my Saudi friends are going to be, absolutely upset about it, but I can tell you there has been Saudi fatalities. The Saudis are wondering what to do. Do they announce them? Do they because that will necessitate retaliation. So they are doing their best at the moment not to enter the conflict, but from every corner they are being attacked by the IRGC from Iran, by ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones. They are being attacked now by the Iraqi militias, created and funded and directed now by Iran, with drones and with cruise missiles. Not only against Saudi Arabia, but against the entire GCC, except Oman. And now the Houthis decided finally, to grace us with their presence and to enter the conflict. Woohoo! And that, according to my, Saudi intelligence source, basically, he said we feel besieged now, from the north, from the east, from the south. And I, said to him, basically, so are you saying, basically, you practically ducked, And he said to me, well, yes, but we're capable of giving good ducking back too, So just wait for it, my dear friend. He was telling me.
Well, I was wondering, is it the Saudis themselves and the Emiratis who are holding back? Is the Trump administration saying, just hold on? I wonder what's going on behind the scenes.
There is a reason. Because why? The Saudis and the Emiratis are saying, if we are going to attack, we have only one target in mind, because everything else is being attacked. Basically, we are running out of target selection choices as far as Iran is concerned. But really, there's only one sector we would love to go and attack, which is
it's the oil installations.
Exactly.
But that would be a red line for Iran big time. But, a red line was crossed this morning, Aimen, because a Kuwaiti desalination plant was attacked by Iran. You have been telling us literally for 8 years that desalination plants is the reddest of red lines for the region. So this is a major turning point, surely.
Okay, I can reveal something to every listener here. Based on the, privileged information that we here at Conflicted are privy to, that on Thursday, the 26th of March, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, and UAE, these 4 countries, exchanged among them the official letters of activation of military and defense treaties.
I see.
Yeah. So basically, they are activating all of these necessary protocols to establish a unified command center for an operation. They will choose its name. They are basically preparing everything. And it's clear now that in the next 9-10 days, we will see a far more assertive GCC, defending its interests, even to the death if necessary.
Well, dear listeners, this is why you listen to Conflicted. This episode is going to focus primarily on the phenomenon of Iranian sleeper cells in the Middle East, but also and especially in the rest of the world, including the West. We will talk about the allegations. We will talk about recent attacks, which have been linked possibly to such sleeper cells. We will also talk about the history of sleeper cells. We're going to do the whole shebang as normal. But before that, we will talk a little bit more about the upcoming American action to secure the Strait of Hormuz. It's going to be a great episode. Let's get right into it. So, Aimen, before we talk about Iranian sleeper cells, I do want to talk about the Strait of Hormuz. Friend of the show, Giri Rajendran, who has been on in conversation with me twice now, he sent me some pretty thoughtful text messages the other day raising the issue of Bandar Abbas, the big city with the huge Iranian naval presence just beyond the Strait of Hormuz. Now, you said it in a previous episode that there will be no land invasion of Iran, only an amphibious assault on the islands in the Gulf. Giri says, well, taking islands will not be enough, he says, because, they can be, they're exposed, They're easy to target. They can be hit by ballistic missiles and drones, of course. All of these things from the mainland, especially Bandar Abbas, this significant city with a significant military presence. So, Aimen, even if Kharg Island is seized, it is hard to supply, it is hard to defend so long as Iran dominates the mainland in the way that it currently does. So, Bandar Abbas will have to be dealt with, and it seems to me pretty obvious that they will have to at least launch a ground invasion of that part of the Iranian mainland to secure Bandar Abbas and to neutralize the threat that it does pose to their attempts to take over those islands.
Well, first of all, I disagree to some extent here, respectfully to your with your friend. And any friend of yours is a friend of mine, Thomas, as you know.
He's a very dear listener, Aimen. He follows us very closely, and he admires you and learns a lot from you. This isn't a criticism. He's just really wondering, what are they going to do about Bandar Abbas? It is a good question.
Basically, they will just do a Gaza-style, Lebanon-style, warning for the population of the city, possibly either partially or entirely, to evacuate. And then basically deal with the city in a way that will resemble Gaza. The reason is because they will look at the port and all the naval facilities and the docks and the berths, and they will basically estimate the level of damage and destruction they have to inflict. And then they will identify certain centers inside the city that are centers of command and control for the IRGC Navy and special units, as well as the IRGC anti-ship missile units. So they will identify all of these centers, and then based on that, they will create perimeters on the map, publish the maps in Farsi, and say anyone within that red highlighted zone on the map, leave. You have 24 hours to pack your bags and leave, because the level of damage that's going to be inflicted on the port and the facilities there is going to be decisive and huge. And so that is my understanding. And it's not only Bandar Abbas, by the way. Chabahar, just on the Gulf of Oman, and Bushehr, the port of Bushehr.
With the very, very, very important nuclear facility, civilian nuclear energy facility, which people are really warning could be disastrous if it's compromised, and the kind of the radiation cloud over the Gulf will be very bad.
Actually, I already have also intel from a senior source in the GCC, where he told me that they received intel from another big Western nation that the Iranians, you see, on the day, roughly about 24th of March, 25th of March, on these 2 days, Iranian trucks carrying C4 and TNT explosives were actually moving into the facility itself of the Bushehr nuclear reactor, while 163 Russian engineers were just running out of it, straight into the buses, and then these buses were driving, heading to Armenia. So it's a total evacuation of Russian engineers. In other words, now we could be witnessing soon a false flag operation where they destroy, the reactor at Bushehr and cause a significant radioactive contamination.
My goodness.
But that's basically where they call it the strategic dead man switch.
Oh my God.
The strategic dead man switch. I'm holding the switch to a bomb. If you shoot me, and then basically you shoot me, I die, and my thumb, will, no longer be on the switch, which I'm pressing. Then if I'm dead, you're dead. So it's really what we are seeing. Forget Mexican standoff. This is radioactive Mexican standoff right now.
Radioactive dead man switch. But, this is going to put the Gulf states on the other side, the Arab states, in hot water because if, as you said before, they're preparing themselves to enter the war in a big way and to fight to the death, that means they're willing to risk radioactive contamination from Bushehr.
Well, there could be that problem, but also on top of this, the fact that the Iranians are doing that while saying, I'm going to attack you, but you can't attack me back. And so, no one's going to accept that. You want to blow up Bushehr? Do it. Basically, because we all know that no matter how much protestations you will do that it was the Israelis who did it. You see, basically, this is the problem with the Ayatollah's thinking always. It's all about, basically, if I go down, you go down. It's like that kind of, exceptionally vindictive, military tactical mentality. Because they decided to build what we call ballistic missile cities. They are subterranean ballistic missile city. And we talked about it before. They built cities like these, but they built cities like these around Bushehr itself, around the nuclear reactor. They were actually firing ballistic missiles against Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Israel and Jordan from Bushehr. There are footage, verified, geolocated footage of these ballistic missiles going through shafts, in the mountains. Basically, they are designed to go through shafts in the mountains, and being launched from subterranean level. And then if you try to blow them all up, some of them are extremely close to the Bushehr nuclear facility.
Gosh.
They are basically using what I call radioactive shield, not a human shield, radioactive shield.
Yeah.
There has been, of course, attacks against these subterranean ballistic missile cities, even in Bushehr, especially those that are around between 8 and 5 kilometers. But then there are some that are within 2 or 3 kilometers radius of the facility. But now, suddenly, the Russians evacuated just on the, they completed their evacuation on the 25th of March, just 5 days ago, all the way to Armenia. And the intelligence that the Iranians are basically driving explosives into the facility itself could indicate their intention to create a false flag and saying, well, the Israelis has been bombing the vicinity for a while now. It's the Israelis who did this. But the GCC has already been pre-warned. Do not believe that this is a Israeli attack.
Well, just to sort of finish up on the Bandar Abbas question, you told us that on the first day or two of the war, Bandar Abbas was attacked in a big way, so clearly they've been preparing the ground. But as you say, in order to give them the opening they need for the amphibious assault on the Gulf Islands that they want to take, they will have to issue evacuation orders to civilian areas of Bandar Abbas, and they're going to go full Gaza on that city. An important city, an ancient city, especially important in the Safavid era onwards, when it became the Safavid Empire's kind of naval foothold for the Indian Ocean. So that's quite a big move. It's something to look forward to with trepidation, I say.
Indeed, absolutely.
Okay, Iranian sleeper cells, Aimen. Much has been alleged about Iranian sleeper cells, Iranian-backed terrorist networks underground, not activated, not mobilized, but they're ready to act should the Quds Force tell them to do so. The UAE recently announced that it had dismantled a terrorist network inside Emirati territory operated by Hezbollah and the IRGC. And since the 28th of February, when this war began, there have been a number of attacks throughout the West, which some people say signify Iranian-backed or Iranian-inspired sleeper agents being activated. On the 6th of March in London, 4 men were arrested, allegedly working with the IRGC, surveilling Jewish targets in the city. On the next day, the 7th of March, 3 synagogues were attacked with gunfire in Toronto. The day after that, the U.S. Embassy in Oslo, Norway was bombed. And the day after that, a synagogue in Liège in Belgium was bombed. The day after that, the U.S. consulate in Toronto was fired at. On the 12th of March, 2 days later, a truck rams a synagogue in Michigan. Over the 13th and 14th of March, Jewish sites are attacked in Rotterdam and Amsterdam in the Netherlands. On the 20th of March, Scottish police arrest 2 men trying to break into a secure submarine facility in Scotland. On the 23rd of March, an arson attack destroys Jewish-run ambulances in London. That's just a few of these, let's call them minor incidents across the West, often involving attacks against Jewish civilians, that people are saying is evidence of Iranian sleeper cells. Before we get into the larger story about sleeper cells and Iran's sleeper cells, Aimen, what do you think about these recent attacks? Are they evidence that that the Quds Force is activating sleeper agents?
Well, yes, the timing. You cannot mistake the timing. And also at the same time, there has been briefings by MI6 talking about Iranian Telegram channels recruiting even young teenagers and inciting them to take up to do some action. Now, just like with Iran's policy of first using what we call old or small payload missiles at the beginning of the war, they were firing basically the old stock to get rid of it and to to prepare to use the better ones. It's the same thing here. They are basically using their amateurs, for the time being, reserving the professionals for the bigger, later phase.
Well, Aimen, I think it's true to say that in your long career, in various guises, undercover agent inside Al-Qaeda, man working for financial institutions, helping to thwart terrorist financing, and then later as a sort of, spy for hire, if you like, a freelance security consultant, as they call you, you have a lot of personal experience with the phenomenon of Iranian sleeper cells.
Oh, yes, because at the end of the day, I want to be honest, describe it as the Iranian sleeper cell phenomenon. I will describe it as the Iranian axis of resistance sleeper cells, because the IRGC built a formidable machine of people who are working in finance, also who are trained as militants, and people basically who went ahead and built front businesses on behalf of it. So actually, the sleeper cell could be a terrorist financing and fundraising network, business fronting and money laundering network, narcotics trafficking, as well as trafficking in weapons and counterfeit currency, illicit goods, and counterfeit goods, which I've seen it, even baby formulas. Just don't get me started. Even baby formulas, things like Aptamil, which is manufactured in Iran illegally, without permission, without license, and then smuggled to places as far as India and Pakistan and Turkey, and Russia, pretending to be the original goods, and even counterfeit tobacco, So I've seen that all. But then also, there are cells that are actually could be all of the above, and in addition, they have sophisticated military training, especially in acts of terrorism and sabotage, as well as hostage taking and assassinations. That I have seen.
Well, Aimen, I can't wait to hear about your personal memories, your personal experiences. I'm sure you've got some interesting stories. Before we get to them, though, I think, let's lay out a bit of the history. And the irony is that the history of the sleeper cell really can be linked to Iran, as a civilization from the very beginning, because some scholars say that the sleeper cell phenomenon first arises in, between the 11th and 13th centuries among the Nizari Ismailis. We've talked about them on Conflicted before. They had a group called the Assassins, the Hashashiyun, those who, weirdly, those who smoked hashish. The Assassins. They were based in the now legendary Alamut Castle in the mountains in northern Iran, and they really, caused fear throughout the Middle East and into Europe even. They had operatives embedded in enemy territory. Those operatives would be secret. They would stay patiently waiting for the word, and then they would launch a quick, secret, targeted assassination. And this terrified people, the assassins. Now, that's kind of romantic. And it may not really be the birth of the sleeper cells, but I always like to talk about the assassins. The real birth of the modern revolutionary underground sleeper cell emerges in the 19th century. Like so many problems in this world, especially now, problems plaguing the Middle East, they can be linked to that European radical strain that arose in the 19th century. And as always, a Frenchman is to blame, Aimen.
It's always the French.
Louis-Auguste Blanqui was the first major thinker to sort of systematize the idea of small conspiratorial groups embedded in the civilian population to slowly and secretly wait to do something dramatic to effect revolutionary change. And no one will be surprised that Vladimir Lenin and his Leninism, his form of Marxist Bolshevism, Leninism, perfected this or moved this idea forward. In his book, in his tract, What is to be Done, which was published in 1902, he advocated that professional revolutionaries around the world, linked sort of secretly in this way, should practice a kind of strict compartmentalization and create underground networks inside states that Lenin deemed hostile to the inevitable Marxist proletarian revolution that would happen. Now, the Soviet Union perfected it. The Soviet Union sponsored sleeper cells, underground cells of Marxist revolutionaries everywhere. This led in the West to the so-called Red Scare, as America and other capitalist states tried to find these sleeper cells, uncover them, expose them, and get rid of them. But in the mid into the late 20th century, right, the model is globalized alongside the New Left and Third Worldism, again working with the KGB and the Soviet Union, and groups like the FLN in Algeria, the Viet Cong in Vietnam. They all employed urban clandestine cells embedded with civilians with this idea of long-term infiltration. So they would just wait silently, build up the network, build up the capability, and wait. And the sleeper cell, by the end of the 20th century, and Al-Qaeda really falls into this model to some extent.
Indeed.
The sleeper cell becomes the primary tool of weaker state and non-state actors when they were, combating strong states. And to some extent, Aimen, the major established states of the world, America, European states, Japan, China, they struggle to this day really to know how to deal with the sleeper cell phenomenon. But it has to be said, in the last 50 years, it is really the Iranian Revolution that has most successfully utilized the sleeper cell. I mean, do you think that's fair to say?
Indeed, without any hesitation. Now, just to give the listener a little bit of background so they at least trust my word on the sleeper cells, given the fact some will ask, what are your qualifications, Aimen, on speaking on sleeper cells? What do you know about them? Well, I was embedded in quite a few myself. So that's the first.
Aimen Dean, sleeper cell agent extraordinaire.
Indeed. So, well, because I was embedded within, the Chechen, jihadists, sleeper cell in Azerbaijan and Baku in 1996 in the finance / logistics / espionage / recruitment. So these are the four missions that were given to us, and I was a member of a 5-member sleeper cell, and it was for more than 5 months. So imagine, like 5. And so that sleeper cell was active under the nose of the Azeri intelligence. And in fact, we recruited, surprisingly, the head of the Baku, branch of the Azerbaijani security forces and intelligence.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, that's a real grab. My goodness, what a success story.
Indeed. And so he was coming always every month to our villa, which was our headquarters. which we used for the finance, of course, of the Chechen Mujahideen, Ibn Khattab and Sham al-Basayev and all of these people. And so they depended on us, basically for the funding, cash, equipments, food, medicine, all of these things. And so he used to come and we used to give him a $30,000 envelope every month, clockwork. So he not only turn a blind eye to what we do, in fact, assist us. So at the time, he was giving us visas, long-term visas to stay in the country legally. If we need any shipments at the airport, containers coming, whatever, he would clear them. It's a hard work, man. But then, of course, I was a member of a sleeper cell that was planning a terrorist attack basically in one of the Gulf countries against the United States Navy. And it was going to be a big one. But luckily, I was the spy also, so I was a double agent.
Aimen Dean, what a life you have led, honestly.
And I was there for 13 months. It's 13 months. I was, essential to the planning of this mission, but also at the same time, I wasn't the leader of it, but I was a part of the planning. So thank God for that. So I knew who will be the suicide bombers. I knew who, and it was directed directly from Iran by Hamza Rabi', who was the head of operations for Al-Qaeda at that time. That was in 2004.
Aimen, what was life like inside a sleeper cell for 13 months? What was your daily routine like?
Same, normal. You go to the mosques, to the malls, basically, you go and, have, fun with the guys, basically, you go for, either, fishing, boating trip, you go to the beach. Life is normal, except that, at some times you have to source some materials for explosives. That's on the side. Basically on the side also you do the recceing and surveillance, reconnaissance and surveillance against the targets. And you report back to, Iran, to Hamza Rabi'. And so, and also you are in touch always with the Qaeda in Saudi, and its leaders. So it was really a normal life, but with moments of kind of devious activities.
Well, that reminds me of the documentary film I helped to produce, Path of Blood, which is
yes, I
made
love it.
entirely of found footage of that that Al-Qaeda operatives in Saudi Arabia filmed themselves inside their sleeper cells. And a lot of that footage involves seeing them surveilling potential targets. It's really creepy footage where you see this grainy old VHS recorder
Indeed.
just kind of zooming in on a guard post outside a
compound,
residential compound or something. And I guess actually, Aimen, now that I think about it, when you say that when you were a double agent inside your sleeper cell planning that attack against a U.S. naval installation in the Gulf, and you were contacting Al-Qaeda in Saudi Arabia, you were contacting those very guys whose footage I later helped make into a film.
Indeed. You remember you and I sat down and we were looking at the footage and I was telling you, oh, that's a friend. Oh, yeah, I know this guy. Oh, you remember?
Well, that's how we became friends, actually, just over that project. You came in as an advisor to help us, to verify that we weren't entirely wrong in our analysis of this footage and our analysis of the history. But it's creepy stuff. And you were one of those guys, really. I mean, obviously working for the British, but still, you were there.
Indeed. And so this is just to highlight to the listener the first qualification that I have as an expert on what a sleeper cell is. But also the other side of the expertise is that after I left, the service of Her Majesty's government at that time, I went into the service of His Majesty King Mammon. I joined the bank, King Mammon. But seriously, during my time in that global bank, and that global bank had thousands of branches in 86 countries. Can you imagine? 86 countries from Latin America to North America, Central America, Africa, Middle East, all of Europe, most of Southeast and East Asia. And so for me, I was straight away appointed into two distinct but it meant basically I had two salaries and two hats. So I was serving in the geopolitical risk department, but also I was serving in the financial intelligence unit. And in the financial intelligence unit, I was investigating, charitable networks, mosques, and also high net worth individuals who are giving to certain, CSR projects. And I'm looking at the identifiers of sleeper cells, and I was discovering them one by one.
Well, Aimen, we're going to hear about your experience trying to uncover sleeper cell networks and the financing that underwrote them when we get back from this quick break. When we get back, dear listeners, Aimen's going to tell us all about his experiences combating sleeper cells. We'll be right back. We're back. Aimen, I think it's important to point out that when we talk about Iranian sleeper cells, in a way, those entities that we call Iranian proxies today, like Hezbollah and the Houthis, they started out as sleeper cells. I mean, Hezbollah only came out from the shadows officially in 1985, but 3-4 years before that, it would have begun as efforts that the IRGC was carrying out inside mainly South Lebanon, finding recruits, Shia men, indoctrinating them, organizing them, training them, so that when they needed to call them to rise up, to mobilize, and to do something, they would. So it's not like there's a huge separation between the proxies that are now big and powerful and, well, less so than before, but they're still established, and these sleeper cells that are in South America, in North America, in Europe, and elsewhere.
Look, this is why I say that when we say the Iranian sleeper cell networks, we are really saying the Iranian, IRGC, axis of resistance, sleeper cell networks. It's really far wider than that, because the IRGC realized from the beginning that by co-opting Hezbollah, into its network, they have gained a considerable reach, because the secret word here is the global Shiite diaspora, especially the global Shiite Lebanese diaspora. Remember, for every individual living in Lebanon right now, there are 5 million of them. There are actually 4, individuals who are living outside of Lebanon. So there are 22 million Lebanese diaspora.
This is one of the reasons why there's so much IRGC terrorist, underground terrorist activity in Latin America, in South America, because South America has a very large Lebanese diaspora.
Exactly.
And so it has been a natural target for IRGC infiltration and organization since 1979. And in 1992, as you pointed out, in Buenos Aires, there was an Israeli embassy bombing carried out by a sleeper cell linked to Iran. In 1994, the Argentine Israelite Mutual Association, the AMIA, was bombed as well, again, carried out by a sleeper cell linked to Iran. 85 people were killed. So it's this Lebanese diaspora. I mean, we don't want to tar at all Lebanese people outside of Lebanon, not at all. However, a small number of them are used as agents by the Iranian regime to carry out terrorist attacks, or at least plan terrorist attacks throughout the world and wait for the call to carry them out.
I wish it was small, Thomas. We are not talking about really small numbers, because that's my experience here. We're talking about Lebanese Shia, not like in Lebanese Christians or anything like that, like in basically or Sunnis. I'm talking here Lebanese Shia, the 40% of them, the 40% of the Lebanese Shia who are ideologically aligned with Hezbollah. These are the ones who are most likely to be acting on basis of religious duty towards Hezbollah, because of you remember we told you about the beehive mindset, that you have the supreme leader of Iran being the ultimate religious, military, and political authority.
The queen bee.
Exactly. And that filters through all the way to the sleeper cell, the little bees, basically all across the world, collecting nectar, but, this is the true representation here. So when we talk about them, so when, you mentioned Latin America, and just to give you an example here, the Lebanese Shiite pro-Iran, pro-IRGC cells that exist all over Latin America is the reason why I spent months, basically of my life between 2011 and 2013 on behalf of the Global Bank, basically going maybe 7 times to Brazil, 3 times to Argentina, several times to Paraguay and Uruguay, and Venezuela, basically to Caracas. So basically, I spent my life at that time, just looking at them. I went to look at the cities, basically, I went to Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Santa Catarina. I went to Parachi. I went to São José dos Campos, and then, of course, the crown jewel of everything that the IRGC and Hezbollah do in Latin America, which is the state of Paraná, in particular, in Brazil, and in particular, the Foz de Iguaçu, where, of course, it is such a romantic place, beautiful place. I mean, I showed you the pictures where I was, in the helicopter and everything and all that. But, it's a beautiful place. And because it has the Foz de Iguaçu Falls, so the Iguaçu Falls, they call it the cataratas, there. It's so beautiful, basically it's these, beautiful waterfalls, with the Amazon and everything. But it is the tri-border area, if we remove the romanticism of the cataratas.
Yeah, this is the border of Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay.
Exactly. So there are 3 cities there. So you have the Iguazu city in Argentina, the smallest of all the 3 towns, and then you have Foz de Iguaçu in Brazil, and then you have Cidade del Este, in Paraguay. You could drive between the 3 cities in about half an hour. Seriously, you can take the triangle, from one city to another, half an hour it will take.
Because they're sort of border cities, central government in all 3 states is weak there. And am I right that the cities do have a large Lebanese diaspora population?
A large Lebanese diaspora with some handpicked IRGC commanders, which I have identified some of them. I took pictures of them. I did surveillance against them at that time. So basically, I was looking into what they are doing, where they, which, safe houses basically they were staying in. Although, that wasn't my remit, but basically it's just,
it's your hobby.
The fox and the rabbit, so basically my fox instincts, basically kicked in. And so what happened is I realized immediately that when you go there, one of the weird things, by the way, is that you go there, it's almost like the Amazon jungle, except it's not an Amazon, but basically still similar to it. It's like a rainforest. Is this Latin American rainforest. And then out of nowhere, you see this massive, white, big mosque. It's the largest mosque in all of the Americas.
Yeah.
It's called the Foz de Iguaçu Central Mosque. But also, the Sunnis, because Sunnis and Shia, basically use it there, basically they call it Umar ibn Khattab Mosque, in order to throw away the suspicion. But in fact, basically, it is the center of everything, happening there.
Taqiyya, man, taqiyya.
Yeah, taqiyya. So, and then, you immediately notice that in Cidade del Este, there are huge, crude, old-looking malls, which is not like the grand shopping malls with food courts and escalators and everything. No. These are normal buildings where you go in, instead of apartments, it's actually shops with windows, so it's really crude. And these are Lebanese people with the high tech, all the high tech you can imagine, from phones to laptops to, screens, and drones. But then, slowly, gradually, you can start to see the underbelly of that. Behind that is weapons, narcotics, immediately. And of course, counterfeit currency. And I spent weeks there investigating the whole thing. Basically, seeing which banks these people are banking with. And I realized that the bank I was working for was actually, the reason why between $4 and up to $6 billion were laundered every year through the three cities, because the bank I was working for had operations in Brazil, had operations in Paraguay, and had operations in Iguazu in Argentina. So Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay, and since these 3 cities make a triangle that is only half an hour between them all, you understand immediately that they were laundering the money, pretending that the sale of weapons and narcotics are actually the proceeds of all of these iPhones and Samsung and, all of these laptops, when in fact, no sales were taking place. It's like who? Like, not many people, like, basically were buying these tax-free things. The reality is that all of this in order to cash in. And basically, I realized that and as soon as, like, basically I realized that, I then wrote a whole report about it. And then when you look at all the people who were standing there are always Lebanese in these shops, and sometimes there is always one Iranian. So one Iranian guy moving between the shops, making sure basically that keeping an eye on the conversations, especially if they see a foreigner like me, coming in.
Well, I was going to ask Aimen, how did you remain under the radar? I mean, clearly you were there. They saw you. How did you go undetected? They must have thought, this guy's a bit suspect.
Thank God I had some Brazilians with me, both male and female. So the female elements, like, basically was a little bit like, so to push away suspicion. Yeah, we live in, Sao Paulo and, Europa Jardins or whatever, like, basically, in some of the best, like, basically neighborhoods in Sao Paulo. So we are pretending like, we're coming for iPhones and laptops and all of these things. Like, we did, like, our homework before we went. So I wasn't alone, I wouldn't. And so in the end, when I went back, I remember, to the UK, and I wrote a whole report about it. And the CEO of the bank at the time realized that, holy guacamole, especially Brazilian guacamole, we need to exit one of these three markets. Which one? And then he looked me in the eye and he asked, like, basically, which one we are most exposed to that kind of shit.
Sure, it's terrifying, especially in the post 9/11 era and the post financial crisis era. The banks were being heavily looked at by the government.
Fined. Actually, the same bank was fined, $3.9 billion by the DOJ over Mexican cartels.
Yeah.
So earlier, like, so basically he was like nervous, like, and it's like, for God's sake, like, tell me which one is the most exposed. And I said, well, it's Brazil, sir. It's Brazil. Because in Brazil, there are 6 million Lebanese, 2 million of them are Shia, and safe to say 800,000 of them are, solid Hezbollah. How do I know that? Or at least, how did I guesstimate that? Based on Al-Khums, the 20% religious tax they pay to Ayatollah Khamenei himself.
Yeah.
They call it Khums al-Imam.
Yeah. You've told us about Khums al-Imam. So help us understand more the sort of how this works. So you said that there's these shopping malls that are fronts. They are pretending to sell iPhones and stuff.
Yes, for narcotics and for guns, yeah.
But so the guns, especially, are these guns that are being sold to just kind of any criminal element who wants a gun? Or are these guns being smuggled in?
Cartels, yes.
Okay, so it's not like these guns are being smuggled in to arm Iranian sleeper cells. They're just being smuggled in to sell and to raise cash on the black market for Iran's, foreign policy activities.
Exactly. So narcotics, relationship with the cartels, important, but also for smuggling humans into the US later. Like, so basically, this is where, okay, you come to the Foz de Iguazu region. From there, from Brazil, you make it into Venezuela. And in Venezuela, that's another, game altogether. But I will just finish the story of what's happening in, Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Parachi, all of these places in Brazil, in Santa Catarina. The Shiite Lebanese community there, they collect the money, the khums, the 20% tax on income that they make. It amounts to billions of dollars every year. And then what they do with it is that they put it through with my own eyes. I've seen in the charity register, just in the city of Sao Paulo, they have registered 2,061 charities.
Wow.
This is, with multiple bank accounts for each one. How on earth are you going to bloody audit this? How? And then the money movement, takes us into a whole new world, like, in West Africa. And don't get me about West Africa. Like, I will start with West Africa later. But then when you, when you go to Caracas in Venezuela and all the Islamic centers there, you will see that, look, man, I remember one of them told me, Of course, because it's for me, I can easily pretend to be a Shia, and no one can even challenge my Shia credentials because I'm a Bahraini with a Lebanese mother from the south.
Absolutely. No. And you know the texts, the mythology, their whole theology.
Yeah, I know the whole, prayers, dua kumayl, basically I can, recite the whole, 12 imams and who they were, basically.
You can practice a taqiyya all your own, Aimen.
Exactly. I have my own Aimen taqiyya, and so.
I know. I'm telling you, dear listeners, we're all going to find out in the end. It was Aimen Dean all along. He was the puppet master behind the scenes. You are the supreme leader. All right, Aimen. So you can pretend to be a Shia, and there you are was it Caracas you were?
In Caracas, yeah. And so again, around 2013. And so he is, this guy in one of the Islamic centers that belongs to Iraqi, actually. He's an Iraqi who was talking to me, but he is in a hybrid Lebanese Iraqi, because it belongs to Imam al-Khou'i, in Najaf. So he was telling me, by the way, if, do you know anyone, basically who wants, to purchase a genuine, not only a Venezuelan citizenship, but actually a Venezuelan citizenship with a diplomatic passport. I said, how much the cost? He said, $400,000, you get it, a piece. And you get it, basically, no questions asked. You will be a diplomat for life. And between you and me, I was tempted. It's like, hey, can I? But, it's like, Venezuelan diplomat, viva la Hugo Chavez, viva Maduro, anyway. But he told me that at that time, and this is 2013, that 1,300 Iranian IRGC and Hezbollah operatives were in possession of these passports, and they are using them all over Africa, Asia, and Europe.
Wow.
It grants them access, visa-free access, and even to Canada.
Can I ask a stupid question, though, Aimen?
No question you will ever ask is stupid.
Well, I don't know, because I feel that maybe some of the listeners like me will be thinking, well, are these sleeper cells? Are we still talking about sleeper cells? Or are we talking about a global network of Iranian operatives, professionals who are moving beyond countries? Because I have an idea of a sleeper cell as kind of made up of normal people, normal civilians who are waiting. They're not really doing anything. They're waiting to be told to do something.
And this is why I need to explain that there are 5 kinds of sleeper cells.
Oh, my Lord.
Yes. So there is, the religious authority sleeper cells. So the imams in these mosques and their assistants and some of their students are in fact sleeper cells. They are military trained, but also they are involved in finance. Which finance? The religious kind of finance, the khums, the collection of this money. So that's the first kind of sleeper cell. The second kind of sleeper cell is the diplomatic sleeper cell. It's basically the individuals who are extra staff, in the embassies, and they do nothing except recruitment, espionage, and all of these things. So, this is what they do. That's the second kind of sleeper cell. The third sleeper cell is proper espionage, and who are ordinary individuals. They could be doctors. Actually, in the UAE, they arrested a doctor recently who was a sleeper cell. And this is where the underbelly of each of these countries, whether it is in Latin America or in Eastern Europe even, and in Europe, is the 2 kind of drivers. The taxi/Uber driver and the food delivery bike or motorbike driver. I'm not kidding.
Like a Deliveroo guy is an Iranian sleeper cell agent?
We caught some of them here, in the UAE recently.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. So because they have access to in neighborhoods, who would suspect, basically a guy on a motorbike with a box, basically behind him says, any of these, Deliveroo or Uber Eats or whatever, or Kareem. At the end of the day, basically they will go around, they will collect information, when in fact they are not on a delivery. They are being paid hundreds of dollars in order to collect information. So the same thing in Brazil, or in Paris, or in, for example, another city I investigated for IRGC and Hezbollah activities, their center in all of Eastern Europe, which is the city of Cluj, in Romania.
Wow, Cluj, a lovely city in Transylvania, I think. I've been there.
Yes, it's in Transylvania. Like, I mean, they love vampires there. So, but they are all in all of these exotic places. Even in the city of Ljubljana in Slovenia, they have like their own centers. So you have, basically these, third kind of sleeper cell, the individuals who actually collect information, and all of their mission, they are not trained, on militant activities. Their entire mission is collect information on individuals, on installations, on sites, secret information, whether it is technology, defense, medicine, industry, designs, IPs,
Goodness.
anything they will collect.
So what are the other two types of sleeper cell?
Then the other two types is the business front. So like the people I met in Ciudad del Este, so these are the business fronts. Those people like basically who owns, mostly mobile phone shops, or they own restaurants. And I will tell you about restaurants later. Like basically, I identified several restaurants in London that are IRGC owned.
Oh, wow.
Yes, so, and then you have like basically their favorite business, which is basically money exchange. They buy a lot of these licenses on behalf of Western Union. And I remember like basically Western Union, for some reason wanted my help, but then basically they stopped, because they realized that if I were to start investigating, like basically it's like bringing a fox into the hens coop. Like,
Goodness gracious. Aimen, this is also distressing.
yeah. So MoneyGram, all of these places, they buy these little like corners, even very small
Little
corner
franchises,
within, franchises within a shop. So there will be, for example, if you go to Edgware Road in London, or if you go basically like to Saint Germain, like in Paris, or in Molenbeek in Brussels, and many other you will see these little shops that are grocery shops, but inside them there is Western Union or MoneyGram. You go in, there is this very little window. You go to them, and you say, well, I have 10,000 euros to send to here or there, whatever. They say, first of all, at the beginning, they say to you traditional, or the usual service, or the privileged service, especially if they see you as an Arab and everything and all of that. So what's the privileged service? Who sent you? So basically, usually I would say, well, Kadhim or Baqir or whatever, these are the people, basically who sent me, and they say, okay, fine, no problem at all, and they give you a market exchange rate. In other words, they don't make a cent on it, at least the appearance. But the whole thing is, so they can, basically, use it as a money laundering tactic there. They don't make money, they lose on the revenue, but this is how they, when someone come in with the cash, they can cash it in for them. So for example, let's say I come to them, and the money actually is the proceed of
drug sales.
Yeah. Let's say £10,000. I go to them. They will, do all the invoicing and everything and all of that. And voila, I receive on my Revolut, app, £8,000. They took £2,000 there, cut from having done all of these hoops for the money basically to go through certain journeys and then to come back basically to my account. So money laundering is, part of their mission. So these are the fourth cell. The last cell, now this is where we come into it. Those who are trained on acts of terrorism and sabotage. They have experience.
Okay, so this is what most people will think of as a sleeper cell.
Exactly, but the problem is, these people, the last kind of cell, couldn't exist without the other four cells.
No, I see. Yeah.
They couldn't exist without the mosque, basically, the religious cell that will contain them. They couldn't, act without the, other cells.
Diplomatic cover.
That diplomatic cover and everything. They couldn't act, basically without the information gathering of the other cells.
And then the money.
And actually, to give you an example, do you know how IRGC operatives, whether they are Lebanese or Bahraini or Iraqi or Yemeni, when they are in London, basically, do you know, basically how they get their salaries?
No, how?
They go to certain restaurants in London, and let's say Persian restaurants on in Maida Vale, in Kilburn, in these places.
Oh, I like those restaurants, though, Aimen. They're delicious.
Exactly, especially Mirza Qasimi and Sabzi and all of that. I'm not talking about names of restaurants, I'm talking about names of dishes here, yeah? Mirza Qasimi, Sabzi, Cello Kebab Bar, Cello Kebab Makhsus, Cello Kebab Sultani.
So these IRGC agents go to these restaurants in London. What do? How do they get money?
They just go, sit down on the table, and then basically say, they order a dish that is not on the menu. So the password is a dish that is impossible to be on the menu. So for example, basically they will be, asking for, oh, can I have a bouillabaisse, which is a French soup?
Yeah, bouillabaisse.
Or can I have the chicken Kiev? And so, wow. As soon as I say the chicken Kiev, the waiter will ask, basically, if it's with salad or fries or whatever, so he knows what is the exact amount and the exact rank of the individual.
Wow.
So the waiter is a fucking IRGC.
Wow. Aimen, this is something out of a James Bond or a Jason Bourne film. Are you serious?
Do you know that there was a mosque, one single mosque, without naming the name, but it was closed, thanks to, and I know many people in the British Counterterrorism Police who listen to my podcast, they remember, my training. They remember my training, the training I delivered, and the investigation that was done into this mosque. Okay. So that mosque was collecting on annual basis 155 million pounds from all the followers of Imam Khamenei, Ayatollah Khamenei, the now deceased one, in the UK, from the Iraqis, from the Lebanese, basically from the Yemenis, who follow, the line of Ayatollah Khamenei. And it was in a bank, basically that is one of the boutique banks in that account. 155 million pounds a year. So basically, when they disperse all of these salaries, of course they do it in cash and they do it. So when the waiter go inside, he comes back, with a normal Iranian dish or whatever, but with also an envelope. And that envelope will contain, the 3,000 or 4,000 pounds, or 5 or 6, depending. And that's that's the salary of the militant, individuals. These individuals who are just living there waiting to strike. And some of them are taxi drivers. Some of them basically are, students in universities. Some of them basically are, you'll be surprised, nurses or doctors. At the end of the day, they are just waiting for the time to be told, well, do something, so they get in touch with their cell leader. And as a result, their cell leader activate them. They get in touch with him and they are told, well, do you remember we are being given, certain targets to choose from and to act against.
And you think that the recent spate of attacks in Western countries that I listed at the beginning of the episode may have been carried out by individuals in cells like these, but then also earlier things. So like in 2011, a plot was uncovered to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in Washington, for example. Now, this was linked to Iran. In 2018, there was an attempted bombing in France of an Iranian opposition rally.
Yes.
So do we think that these are examples of the activation of sleeper cell agents?
Exactly. And this is, and people don't understand, these sleeper cells exist. From Alaska, again, to Patagonia, all over West Africa, from, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, especially in Abidjan is like the capital of Hezbollah in all of Africa. That's Abidjan for you. I'm sure many listeners will be like, pulling their hair out of frustration. Lagos, Mauritius, and, of course, in Eastern Europe is Cluj, and to some extent Ljubljana. Paris is one of these locations, and we could go on and on. And London, of course, Londonistan. Who could basically forget about Londonistan? The role it plays in the IRGC, wider network.
But what about the United States, Aimen?
It's Dearborn, Michigan. With some cells exist, under the protection of the Muslim Brotherhood, especially in places like California and Texas. And we could go on and on about them. Now, don't forget also the Gulf. Now we come into the GCC.
Your neighborhood.
Exactly, because we are the biggest target. And therefore, we have our biggest share of sleeper cells who are, unfortunately, unfortunately, do not need to be diaspora. Unfortunately, because of the manipulation of eschatology and the Shia faith, some young and foolish members of the Shia communities in Kuwait, in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, in Qatar, and in the UAE sold their souls to the Ayatollahs and decided to betray their own nation states. And, despite the opulent, and amazing living standards and the incredible opportunities that these Shia citizens enjoy, and, please investigate before you tell me they are, isolated and poor and whatever. Just look at Kuwait, look at Bahrain, look at Saudi Arabia. It's not the case at all. But nonetheless, they are recruited, and then, of course, in the last several weeks, there has been significant amount of arrests in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in Saudi, in the UAE, of members of the Shia communities who are citizens of these countries. Some of them have high-paying jobs. That's what kills me.
Like what kind of jobs?
Okay, one of those who was arrested in Bahrain for giving extremely sensitive data and information about locations and individuals and places in Bahrain to the Iranian government was a computer engineer, one of the top computer engineers in the Bahrain National Statistic Agency. So he was the director in the Bahrain National Statistic Agency.
Oh my.
On pay, and his pay is the equivalent, basically, of $182,000 a year tax-free.
Wow.
And he was given medal by the Minister of Interior and a recognition certificate for his role in designing the Bahraini passport.
Oh my goodness.
It's not like we're talking about the deprived here.
No, these are ideologues. They're fellow travelers. They have been recruited to a revolutionary, radical, global movement.
Exactly. And so, for me, when I know that in another Gulf country, it's someone who was responsible for zoning skyscrapers in the municipality of one of the largest cities in the world, and his salary, was $22,000 a month tax-free, plus perks and everything.
Wow, gosh. I'm in the wrong business. Podcasting doesn't pay nearly as much as that, Aimen.
But the pay packet didn't come from the IRGC. It came from their own countries, which they betrayed.
Now, Aimen, we have to wrap this episode up because you've got to go, as you told me yourself. So what are we gonna? Are there any stories, particularly stories from your past that you want to share, or can we just go straight to the question of what listeners, and maybe particularly our listeners in the West, in America, in Britain, in Europe, what they might expect to happen as this war continues? You made it clear at the beginning of this episode, the war is not going to end anytime soon. Maybe 2 months, maybe longer. It might go on for. So, if Iran has only so far activated its amateurs, as you called them, and they have their professionals still to activate, what might we see throughout the West?
Indeed, we will see several types of attacks. The first one will be attacks on the grid and national infrastructure. We will see that. So sabotage against electricity pylons and also fiber optics, basically to disrupt internet and telecommunications. We will see attacks against even cell towers, the mobile phone towers. We will see attacks against the water installations and facilities, especially the places where they are most vulnerable. We will see also the attacks against synagogues. We might see basically an attack against a nightclub frequented by either Jews or Americans. We could see an attempted attack against the gates of military barracks, especially in a military barracks shared with the US personnel in certain bases. That's basically when we talk about Germany, when we talk about France, when we talk about the UK, that's the kind of things we might expect. We will see potential attacks, especially stabbing and whatever, in hotels where Jewish or Israeli tourists basically are known to frequent. So unfortunately, this is going to be activated on a mass scale over the next 2 months as the war progresses, because we said the war will continue 2 months.
And you're saying with 100% sort of certainty, this is going to happen.
I will make it 110%.
Okay.
Yeah, it's inevitable. It's inevitable, and within the next 2 months, watch out for the synagogues, for the hotels, for sabotage on national infrastructure. And unfortunately, that will become a phenomenon. But the sleeper cell is there, and remember, there isn't just only one type of sleeper cell. There are 5, as I have explained, as far as the Iranian, access of power diaspora is concerned.
And, are the security agencies in Britain, in America, in France, in Germany, are they, awake to this threat? Are they working hard to find these cells, to uncover them, to neutralize them?
Based on those who I talked to, Germany already preempted this by a year. More than a year ago, they arrested 1,060 plus, IRGC and Hezbollah operatives. Many were deported. Businesses were closed.
Wow.
They're good. The German authorities, oh my God, basically they're really good. They did it basically decisively, and without fuss. Basically just go arrest them, close their business.
And without much fanfare. People haven't really heard about this. That's a lot of arrests.
Yes, 1,060. It's well known. In addition, the French are trying to be more 1 by 1, 2 by 2, 3 by 3. They're trying to be basically more discreet about it. The British are really good. They are monitoring everything. There has been several arrests, as you have seen. Basically several plots were thwarted. So they are on top of it in terms of awareness, but the scale of it might overwhelm them. That's what I'm afraid of, to be honest.
Oh, dear. Well, dear listeners, that's it for this week's episode with Aimen Dean of Conflicted. It was all about Iranian sleeper cells and some really interesting analysis at the top there about the war, what's going on. It's not likely to end soon. Thank you very much, dear friend. I think it's fair to announce that this evening, Aimen, you will be going on the Piers Morgan show to give Piers Morgan's millions of viewers a dose of conflicted energy.
Indeed.
And I think we can just wish you well for that. Piers Morgan, I think it can be like running the gauntlet because he often has a lot of loud-mouthed, argumentative types. So you're going to have to outshout them, Aimen.
Seeing the panel today, I think it's a very sane panel. Thank God for that.
Oh, that's
good. So we're not going to have any shouting matches. I think basically it's going to be more of an proper intellectual. That's what I hope. Exchange of opinion and analysis. At least I hope that will be the case.
Well, we're proud of you, Aimen. We're glad that you're getting this recognition and that you're getting, your knowledge and analysis more out there. Of course, it's also good for the little podcast Conflicted, that continues to grow. Dear listeners, you should think about subscribing to Conflicted and becoming members of the Conflicted community. Don't just be a dear listener, become a dearest listener and join our growing staple of dearest listeners who get an extra episode every week. Until then, I think we can just say, stay well, goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone, and stay safe.